Welcome back. Now, the Africa Energy Forum is underway in Cape Town, where various stakeholders in the energy space from across the continent are meeting to find solutions for Africa's energy future. And with 2050 net zero emissions targets looming, questions remain about the continent's renewable energy transition as far as financing is concerned, and it all boils down to the bankability of green energy projects. Opy Ramaremisa, head of client solutions for corporates at Absa CIB, joins us to discuss de-risking Africa's renewable energy transition. Thank you so much for your time. Opy, now, how would you characterize Africa's renewable energy story so far?
Hello, and thanks again for the opportunity. I think it's been fairly slow. The African Union has set some strong targets to get renewable energy on board over the next. Now we've got 5 more years. The target was for 2030. So we're starting to see a lot of investments coming in. Forums like this Africa Energy conference, which we are attending this week, helps in putting forth the Africa agenda out there and making it, call it, investable, and for us as bank, transactors, and for me particularly, who works in the risk management space. Some of the work which we do is essentially in articulating that the opportunities are there, and there are instruments which we can help in help de-risk some of the risks which they perceive.
Yeah, and of course, for everything to work well, there needs to be a carrot. So what does Africa have at its disposal that underlines renewable energy ambitions and investor appetite?
Well, we're a big continent, right? The opportunity is immense, So if you compare ourselves, to the likes of Europe, China, and the US, the opportunity here is that you still have a lot in the continent which don't necessarily have access to power, right? And we might not be able to go the route which the likes of Europe and the likes of the US had gone in getting the continent powered up, in the sense of using fossil fuels and the like. We find ourselves in a situation where we can leverage the resources which we have. We're a continent which has where the continent is placed, we've got abundance of solar energy which can be harnessed, as well as wind energy and the like. So we find ourselves in a situation where there is opportunity out there which we can leverage and help have a much more sustainable future in the future.
Yeah, but then obviously you talk about the slow progress that we've made, and what are actually the major risks that the continent faces that impede this momentum in the renewable energy landscape?
What we find, as Absa, when we engage with our clients and the global investable universe out there, one of the themes which usually comes up, some of them are things which are common in every market, things like regulatory delays, offtake uncertainty, and political risk or transitions. But I think what's more prevalent and much more worrying for investors out there is mostly what we call currency volatility, right?
Yes.
For investors is an important aspect which they have to consider. Another one which is quite important is currency inconvertibility, and what we mean by that is how easily a currency is essentially not exchanged for another currency out there in the international markets. And we find, because of exchange control restrictions, a lot of that is not easily achievable, and it makes traditional hedging mechanisms or products not viable to manage such risks out there.
And the narrative that I'm getting here is that traditional financing solutions really are inadequate to match the realities of African markets for renewable energy projects. So what kind of financing tools then should be the lever to kind of pour cold water on these risks?
I mean, what we know and what's quite important to understand is that early stage capital plays a very important role in de-risking some of these projects, right? I mean, the greatest risk comes in when during the construction phase of these projects, and in attracting, call it mature capital, if you want to call it, or long-term capital. People don't want to take that initial construction risk, but only want to come in when the cash flows are start coming out and stuff. So it's important that things like concessionary loans are structured such that they enable long-term capital to then come in later on in the project's life, or when the operations essentially start. But it's important to firstly understand what those risks are. As I said, things like the offtake uncertainty, regulatory delays, and in some cases the political risk or political transitions. And it's important to effectively help and embed some of those risk mitigation strategies from the start, from the moment the project or the opportunity is conceived, and not maybe afterwards when everything has begun, because by then we find that it's usually too late.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that you talk about how important this early stage capital is, because I mean, and I guess really how important it is to get to a stage where the projects are actually bankable. But you talk about the risk that does exist in the construction of these projects. Does that then not come with a higher cost of capital, and how do you navigate that?
It does, and I guess what we as Absa keep on saying to our clients out there is that if you embed some of these risk mitigation strategies from the get-go, you have a higher likelihood of attracting that long-term capital, which is which might not necessarily come with higher cost of capital, etc. So it's important that in the structuring of those transactions, from the get-go, everything is essentially considered, and things like as I said, currency convertibility, which is a very important risk, are articulated. And as Absa, we believe that with our presence across the continent, we're able to leverage relationships with central banks out there to structure some of these bespoke products which help reduce those risks. And in time, we believe that work like that helps in lowering that cost of capital.
All right. Well, we do have to wrap up the conversation there. Thank you so much for your time, Opy, and hoping that the conversations at the Africa Energy Forum this week result in actionable solutions. Well, that was Opy Ramaremisa, Head of Client Solutions for Corporates at Absa CIB.